No story is more sorrowful in the world than the tale of Romeo and Juliet, concludes the Duke in the most famous story about two lovers. Yet in Shakespeare's tragedy, Romeo and Juliet end their lives by their own choice, while in our story, the young lover solves the problem differently. The creation of the Borden family began in Missouri. Michael and Catherine met in school. They were classmates. Michael was captivated by his blonde, radiant, and responsive classmate. In the upper grades, he tried various ways to get her attention. He helped with homework and invited her out for walks. This way, they became best friends and spent a lot of time together, learning lessons and sharing secrets with each other. Gradually, their friendship turned into something more, and they realized they were in love with each other. Michael invited Catherine on a date, where he first declared his love. After some time, the young people got married. The wedding was a beautiful and memorable ceremony, where Michael and Catherine promised to love each other in all life circumstances. After 10 years of marriage, the family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania. Lititz was founded by members of the Moravian Church in 1756, and it was inhabited by descendants of Moravian communities. The primary population of the town were faithful families who sought refuge in their oasis from the horrors of modern life. Life in the town was quiet and peaceful. Many families belonged to the Christian Amish community and led a lifestyle befitting a believer. Their life was simple, with people trying to do without many modern technologies. The Borden family was deeply devout, so the choice of Lititz was no accident. This suburb seemed perfectly suited for the birth and upbringing of children. Life flowed so calmly that a new day was just like the last. This was precisely what the Bordens were looking for: complete family solitude and creation in solitude with God. Michael served in the local church community and taught lessons in Sunday school. Catherine primarily managed the household and assisted her husband in his work. In the community, Michael worked more for spiritual wealth. For everyday worldly needs, he had to work as a manager at a printing company. In the following years, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Most families living in Lititz were large, with some having more than 5 children. Hoping to shield their children from the hardships and dangers of the larger world, families regularly attended church, while local teenagers joined youth groups and were homeschooled. Interactions between families were limited to joint religious societies and celebrations. The family idol created by Michael Borden lasted for many years, with children being raised in faith and discipline. In the early 2000s, the eldest sons, having reached adulthood, went to university and moved to another city to study. This left 3 children at home who continued their homeschooling to the delight of their parents. Neighbors and the couple's few friends spoke highly of the children's upbringing and their diverse interests. Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel were exemplary, kind, and responsive. But it wasn't always this way. As the eldest daughter, Kara, entered her teenage years, it turned the family's traditional ways upside down. Despite her father's prohibitions, she began playing in the local soccer team, sneaking out to discos, and thoughtlessly doing everything she had been forbidden to do before. The young beauty's behavior deeply shook her father. Many hours of talks and instructions did not resonate in Kara's heart. Reasons for arguments appeared, which time and again led to the young rebel's escape. The girl openly showed interest in young men and sought relationships. Thus, in 2005, 18-year-old David and 14-year-old Kara met in a support group for students involved in homeschooling issues. The young people, with their passionate hearts attracted to all things forbidden, quickly established warm, friendly relations. Secretly from their parents, they agreed and created social media profiles, where they began actively exchanging messages. The correspondence was lengthy and very emotional. They exchanged well-encoded messages to keep their communications secret from everyone as long as possible. After a while, exchanging letters was not enough, and they began secretly meeting. At first, these were harmless walks in quiet, secluded places around the city. Then their friendly relationship evolved into a romantic one. They ran away together at night to discos and spent time together until morning. David was older and had already experienced first love and disappointment. Kara was so young that her new, bright feelings could hardly be contained. She didn't just walk, she seemed to fly, and the happy smile never left her beautiful face. Meeting David brought back the obedient Kara to her parents. Her father was overjoyed, believing that the teenage challenges were a thing of the past. But Michael was mistaken. Only the fear of being discovered by her parents quelled the girl's inner fire as she hid her love from them. This deeply saddened Kara. She knew what their reaction to such early relationships would be, as she had been instilled with entirely different concepts of possible love between a man and a woman from childhood, trying to protect her from such knowledge for as long as possible. Fearing their parents' negative reaction, the young couple carefully guarded their secret. But sooner or later, all secrets come to light. One day, unable to hold back, Kara shared her secret with her sister. She showed her a photo of David, shared how their relationship began, and that they were so in love and determined to be together against all odds that they were ready to run away. Her sister, fearful for Kara, told their mother about the planned elopement. Thus, the secret of the young lovers was revealed. One early morning, the young woman climbed through the window into the house and quietly, like a mouse, went up to her room. Elated, Kara was returning from another date with her David. She entered her room and froze. Her mother was sitting on her bed. Everything became clear without words. After breakfast, a conversation took place in which her parents forbade her any relationship with the young man. They were shocked, having shielded their children from violence, controlled substances, and other negative stories, that such misfortune had befallen them. Kara's father was so outraged and disappointed that he forbade her from leaving her room. That night, Kara Borden spent in David's house. At 5:30 a.m., the young lover dropped her off near her house. They agreed that as soon as Kara safely returned to her room, she would send him a text message. However, the awaited message never came. David called her home several times and sent a few messages on social media. An hour later, Kara informed him that she was caught and asked him to come over so her parents could talk to him. David arrived at the appointed time. The conversation began with the father expressing deep indignation and forbidding the young man from seeing his daughter. Kara's parents' morals and stance were very conservative. They were categorically against relationships at their daughter's young age. Words of love did not touch the father's heart. He warned the young man that if he saw him with Kara again, he would be compelled to report him to the police for involvement with a minor. The lengthy, emotional conversation ended on a high note. Kara was locked in her room again, and David left with nothing. The young man got into his old car and drove away, crying for the first time over a girl, or maybe out of hurt that he was not taken seriously. The separation was very difficult. The lovers struggled greatly through the long days apart. They couldn't withstand the test of separation, so they devised a plan, deceive everyone by accepting Kara's father's conditions, pretend to break up, but continue their secret love, and they convincingly played the part of former lovers. In public places or at church, they didn't even greet each other. Kara's parents were appeased, convinced they had protected their daughter from a youthful mistake. David missed her terribly. In the evenings, he read Shakespeare, imagining openly serenading his beloved like Romeo. But in the Capulet and Montague tragedy, the lovers could not reconcile their families and receive their blessing. David Ludwig took decisive action. He called Kara's home asking for a meeting with her father. The young man was very serious and asked his beloved to talk about their upcoming marriage. On November 13, 2005, David Ludwig arrived at the Borden residence for a talk with Michael, the father of his beloved Kara. He announced his love for Kara, their ongoing relationship, and their plans to marry. Michael's response was dismissive. "That will never happen." Anticipating such a response and coming prepared, David, fueled by rage, drew a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he was walking towards the front door. Then, David sought out Kara's mother, Catherine, and shot her while she was sitting on a chair. David then searched for Kara in the house, calling out for her, but he couldn't find her. Afterwards, he got into his car and started to drive away when he saw Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car and told David she wanted to go as far away as possible, get married, and start a new life. The young couple fled the city in the boy's red car. But why would a 14-year-old girl run away with a young man who had just shown such brutality? Wasn't she shocked and scared? Both were considered good kids. How did they turn into criminals? Kara Bordon was reported missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Bordon, were found deceased. After reviewing surveillance footage, the police followed the trail of the teenagers. The footage also proved that Kara had not resisted but willingly accompanied David. Charges of abducting Kara were dropped against David Ludwig. Alerts were issued across the east as Pennsylvania and Indiana police investigated sightings of the couple heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. Authorities received a tip on Monday morning about a vehicle matching that description parked near a truck stop outside of Fort Wayne. Police headed to the area, but the car was gone. State police were alerted, and patrols spotted the car around noon on I-70 in Belleville. David Ludwig merged onto the interstate, leaving them on a 5-mile chase at speeds of 90 to 95 miles per hour on a 2-lane highway. State Trooper David Cox, who was involved in the pursuit, described Ludwig as extremely reckless and dangerous at that moment, causing multiple accidents like in an action movie. The saga of the runaway lovers became a top national news story. Television broadcasts showed the capture of the teenage fugitives after the boy had ended the lives of his girlfriend's parents and took her with him. It turned out the lovers planned to escape far away, get married, and start a new life. The district attorney, commenting on the investigation, stated that the earlier abduction charge against the teenager would be dropped, but the charges for the demise of Michael and Catherine Borden would remain. Ludwig and Kara Beth fled together after the incident and were on the run from the authorities for about 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. Kara Beth was not charged with any crime. David Ludwig was detained without bail on charges of ending lives and abduction. Kara Borden was taken into the care of relatives and church members. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, after a high-speed chase ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the demise of the Bordons following a prolonged dispute. 14-year-old Kara Borden faced no charges. On November 16th, David Ludwig was extradited back to Pennsylvania after waiving extradition. The failed Romeo confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm. "It was a deliberate act. I intended to shoot them if they got in our way, and I did." During the search of the young man's vehicle upon his arrest, no weapons were found. But when police visited Ludwig's home, they discovered 54 firearms. This arsenal belonged to Ludwig's father, a hunter who taught his son how to handle weapons. An 18-minute video from a laptop in his home showed Ludwig discussing plans for an armed invasion of another family's home, showing him bringing weapons into the house, though court documents state they abandoned this plan due to too many cars present. The police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, yet Ludwig filed court documents claiming surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove she was not abducted. Ludwig did not resist efforts to return him to Pennsylvania. A Pennsylvania judge ordered him held without bail. He was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation. A preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of the young individual responsible for ending 2 adult lives in front of their children was brief, as detailed in court documents. Kara's 13-year-old sister, Caitlin, told investigators that her parents were shot after arguing with David for about an hour. According to court documents, Caitlin saw Ludwig shoot her father, then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, presumably the one that took her mother's life. Ludwig then ran through the house calling for Kara, she told investigators. The couple's 9-year-old son ran to neighbors who called 911, reporting the tragic event. In June 2006, David Ludwig entered a plea agreement with District Attorney Donald R. Tuctaro, who had sought the death penalty as punishment. Thus, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree perpetrating among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years, and was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by a legal counsel. In written statements published on November 22, 2005, the abduction charge against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Kara Borden left with Ludwig of her own free will. Ludwig's lawyer reportedly stated that Kara voluntarily accompanied David during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance recordings show that Borden had ample opportunity to escape. Kara admitted that she ran after Ludwig as he left her house. Kara Borden simply wished to marry her beloved, David Ludwig. Kara Beth has been identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and thus the district attorney of Lancaster County did not levy any criminal charges against her. Her actions, alongside Ludwig's during the investigation and the digital trail of emails, blogs, and texts they left behind, contributed to this decision. At a solemn memorial service held at Lancaster Bible College, Kara Beth, amidst her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. The Borden family's neighborhood showed its respect and remembrance by adorning mailboxes with white ribbons. The loss left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. George Landis, an elder from the Monterey Chapel, reflected on the incident by saying that the purpose behind such loss is known only to God, reassuring that Mike and Katie are in a better place. Vera Zimmerman, 50, familiar with the Borden family and Ludwig's mother for 7 years, remarked on the upbringing of the children, pointing out that a lapse in judgment led to the unfortunate events. Friends and neighbors recalled Kara Borden as a joyful and sociable young girl, known for her babysitting in the neighborhood and her passion for soccer. Kevin Eschleman, executive pastor at Ephrata Community Church, noted her regular participation in youth group activities. However, underlying tensions between Kara and her parents were noted by Zimmerman, highlighting concerns over Kara's interest in boys. Samuel P. Lohr, a friend of Ludwig, disclosed to authorities their secret intimate relationship, marked by flirtatious electronic communications and inappropriate image exchanges, according to legal documents. Zimmerman mentioned a significant decision by Kara's parents to disconnect her internet service in response to her relationship with David, indicating their disapproval. The peaceful town was left in shock by the grim events that unfolded, resonating beyond the local community to wider circles, especially those involved in homeschooling. Friends of the family struggled to comprehend how such sheltered children could commit acts of grave severity. Officially, they weren't considered a couple due to parental disapproval of their relationship, shared Stephanie Mammon, a 16-year-old neighbor of the Borden family. This incident underscores the dilemma where David Ludwig, faced with opposition, chose violence as a solution to his problems. David G. Ludwig's appeal for release was ultimately denied by the state appellate court, as announced by the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office. Following his sentencing on June 20th, Ludwig underwent various assessments at Camp Hill before being moved to a state prison in Indiana County to start serving his life sentence for the taking the life of his girlfriend's parents. David Ludwig, at 19, was transferred on August 3rd to the State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove, announced by Susan Norton, spokesperson for the State Department of Corrections. The state chose the Indiana State Prison for Ludwig because of its youthful offender program. Designed for inmates aged 15 to 20, the program aims to teach self-responsibility, discipline, respect for others, and self-worth. According to the Department of Corrections, Pine Grove, opened in 2000, houses some of the state's most challenging young offenders in a therapeutic community setting. Inmates at Pine Grove start their day at 6:10 a.m. with a roll call, followed by a 6:30 a.m. workout session including squats, push-ups, and jogging in place. They returned to their cells at 7:15 a.m. to get ready for breakfast at 7:30 a.m., with lunch at 11:30 and dinner at 4:20 p.m. The bulk of the day is filled with 4 hours of educational classes, ranging from culinary arts, business, computer drafting, heating and cooling system installation, to building maintenance, and 4 hours of personal life management skills training. Inmates also participate in a 90-day military-style leadership development program fostering honor, discipline, honesty, and respect. Transitioning from the county jail, where Ludwig earned his high school diploma, to the state correctional facility was a challenge for the young man, stated Merrill M. Spann, one of Ludwig's attorneys. He will also be amongst young people from the general population and will be able to have visitors. The change was difficult because the county jail was smaller, and he had gotten used to the environment, Spann said. The cost of housing an inmate at Pine Grove, which employs about 430 people, is approximately $120 a day. Mr. Ludwig will be assigned jobs such as janitorial work or food service, and he will engage in daily recreational and educational activities, Norton stated. Inmates can earn between 18 to 42 cents an hour working as carpenters, plumbers, cooks, and laborers. The money earned can be used to purchase clothing, footwear, food, and personal items at the prison commissary. Most of the 250 inmates at Pine Grove stay until they turn 22, after which they are transferred to adult prisons to serve the remainder of their sentences. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 consecutive life sentences for shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in their home in November 2005 after they told him he could no longer see their 14-year-old daughter, Kara Borden. In his latest petition, Ludwig referred to alleged issues, including being treated as a juvenile offender serving a life sentence. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling, which found life imprisonment for juvenile offenders to be unconstitutional. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently denied the request, agreeing with Lancaster County Judge David Ashworth, who previously deemed the challenge untimely and unfounded, according to the county prosecutor's office. Ashworth stated that Ludwig does not deserve the same consideration as minors because he was 18 and a half at the time of the tragedies. David Ludwig is currently incarcerated in Luzerne County. Kara Beth Borden, the 14-year-old girlfriend of 18-year-old David Ludwig, who is accused of ending the lives of the Borden parents and fleeing with her to Indiana, has reunited with her family in Pennsylvania. However, as CBS News correspondent Sharon Alfonsi reports, it remains unclear what role Kara Borden may have played in the incident. According to Alfonsi, the police now view Borden as a victim. She has not been arrested, which leaves open the possibility that she played a significant role in the unfolding events. Given her age of 14, there's also speculation about potential charges against Ludwig for involvement with a minor. Warwick Police Chief Richard F. Garipoli Jr. told CBS News, "Kara is upset, she's crying, she's 14 years old, and it seems we forget that. She's devastated. This has completely changed the fabric of our community," a Borden neighbor involved in the memorial service told CBS News. "They were wonderful people and we'll miss them terribly. It's complete madness, absolute madness," said the Lancaster County, Pennsylvania coroner G. Gary Kirchner. "This isn't a Romeo and Juliet deal, it's much worse." Thus, a decision made in a moment of fury and desperation took 3 lives. Why do we say 3 when there are 2 victims? Having received 2 life sentences, 18-year-old David Ludwig will live out his days in prison, never again to make a choice independently and never to be free again. But is that truly living? The community long remembered this terrible story and couldn't understand how such positive children could so casually commit such evil. Unfortunately, homeschooling didn't prevent this horrific tragedy. Growing up and being educated in a Christian environment didn't stop the cruel act. Perhaps the parents, trusting in God and faith, missed something crucial in raising their children or failed to convey the important lessons of Christian faith effectively. Maybe they weren't fulfilling their parental duties adequately, not having heartfelt conversations with their children, or trusting each other enough to prevent their daughter's secret escapes and stop the quest for new experiences. Perhaps it would have been better to allow the children to live without mentioning the Almighty, still sharing with their children the life they themselves had lived at a young age, where there weren't so many restrictions and deprivations. Deciding for the children, parents eventually faced disappointment from the decisions made later on. We can only speculate what might have prevented this tragedy. From all we've learned, one thing is clear: violence always leads to more violence. When we're taught to live with violence, we become good as long as we're coerced and accepted as part of life. The more we practice, the more we endure, and then use violence to solve our problems. Unfortunately, much of this acceptance of violence comes from Christian homes, but such violence is entirely against Christian teachings. There are crimes that at first glance are difficult to assess unambiguously. On the one hand, the law of any state guarantees the inviolability of life and health of every person. In contrast, it is often opposed by the testimony of witnesses who minimize the guilt of the attacker. One such controversial case was the crime that occurred in the Mullenix family. Let's try to make sense of it together. Let's find out the reasons for the tension and weigh the responsibility of each person involved. Could it be that the victim is far from innocent? Or is her executioner a wolf in sheep's clothing, an unexpected discovery? On September 14, 2006, Newport Beach was troubled. A woman's body was discovered in a body of water. Apparently, the corpse had been wrapped in a sheet and then placed in a box. When exposed to the water, the unreliable wrapping fell apart and exposed what should have been hidden from view. The body floated to the surface after being in the water for no more than a day. Normally, warm water would speed up the decomposition process. Therefore, the appearance of the dead left much to be desired. Forensic medical examination established the cause of the woman's death was multiple stab wounds. In total, she received about 52 blows, one of which came directly to the eye. Specialists agreed that the injuries were caused by 3 different knives, which means there were at least 2 people who attacked the victim. Naturally, the victim had no identification on her, so the police had to work hard to find out her identity. Among the missing, the profile of the woman was not listed, and no new disappearances have been reported so far. Everything pointed to attempts to cover up the crime committed. Experts also determined that the woman had resorted to plastic surgery during her lifetime. She had breast augmentation. Since the identification of bodies by serial number of implants became a routine procedure, the identity of the murdered was soon established. She was 56-year-old Barbara Mullenix. Who is Barbara Mullenix? The future Mrs. Mullenix was born on May 29, 1950 in Munich, Germany. In her youth, she was very beautiful and sociable. Therefore, she was always in the center of attention. However, these qualities brought her not only success with the opposite sex, but also caused her a lot of trouble. At the age of 18, she was subjected to violence. The girl wanted to forget as quickly as possible what happened, but after a while she learned about the pregnancy. To make an abortion Barbara did not become, she decided to bear the child and give it to a good family. After a while, she got married. In the marriage, she gave birth to a son, Alex Hagwood. However, the marital relationship with her first husband did not last long. At the age of 35, Barbara's attention was attracted by Bruce Mullenix. The man recalled that she was a special woman and immediately liked him. She was characterized by straightforwardness and self-confidence. In November 1987, the couple married. Mr. Mullenix was younger than his wife for 9 years, but it was not particularly felt. Barbara knew how to arouse interest and liked to have fun. After moving to Oklahoma City, a daughter, Rachel, was born to the family. Everything was fine at first, but as time went on, problems began. In the evenings, Bruce could skip on a mug of beer, and on weekends to drop in on friends. Barbara at first supported the company, but later became addicted to alcohol. Apparently, the events that occurred in her youth left their imprint. Under the influence of alcohol, the woman, despite the parents' relationship with each other, they loved their daughter very much. They spoiled her and tried to please her in every way. While living in Oklahoma, before the divorce, Rachel had a large room while her father and mother lived in a small one. On the occasion of the girls' birthday parties were always held in the house. Miss Mullenix recalled that she was very close to her mother, even more so than most mothers and daughters. But such a close bond existed only when the woman was sober. The rest of the time, Rachel tried to stay away from her, made no attempt to even talk to her. Our relationship was generally good, but when Barbara drank, she got angry and crazy. She was the first one to get into a fight. Bruce confirmed what his daughter said. Since the house Mullenixoff was located near Hollywood, Barbara was in an extraordinary delight. She loved movies, especially singled out Gone with the Wind. A short time after the move, the woman managed to get a job as an extra. Hollywood dream come true. She felt that in time she would be offered a more serious role. But for now, together with her daughter, took an active part in the masses in movies and TV shows. The scene of the crime was established. Who is the culprit? Police officers could not understand why none of the relatives did not report the disappearance of the murdered woman. Soon, police officers Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright obtained a search warrant for Barbara's home. They hypothesized that since the woman was wrapped in a sheet, the crime could have occurred in bed. So the search for evidence had to begin at Mrs. Mullenix's residence. The police found no one at Barbara's house. At first glance, everything seemed to be in order. There were no visible signs of a crime. However, in one of the rooms on the second floor, a disassembled bed attracted attention. It was without a mattress. It only took a couple hours to reconstruct the scene. The detectives' assumptions had a real basis. Specialists found traces of blood on the walls. Somebody went to a lot of trouble to get rid of the evidence. The blood-stained mattress had apparently been destroyed. There was no doubt that the crime had taken place in this place. The police also believed that the owner of the house knew the perpetrator. Therefore, the first suspect was Mr. Mullenix. It was a strange coincidence that the man was out of town. In addition, just the day after the body was discovered, Bruce returned home. He explained that he was worried because his wife and daughter were not answering their phone calls. The man, of course, had a premonition of something wrong, but in no way expected to hear such a thing. Nevertheless, the news of Barbara's terrible death, the former spouse took it calmly. This also alerted the detectives, so they began to investigate the reason for his departure. Bruce said he was on a business trip. Mr. Mullenix's management confirmed his alibi. The investigation was back to square one. Daughter's love. When Rachel turned 17 years old, she met with Ian Allen. The guy was older than the girl by 4 years. Young people fell madly in love with each other. Ian supported Rachel in everything, even helped with household chores. At first, Barbara liked him. They even spent time together. They went for walks together. They went out together. In order for the lovers to meet freely, Rachel's parents got a special permit. Apparently, so required by law and police officers. Law enforcers often drew attention to the non-standard couple. The girl was allowed to be absent until 1 o'clock in the morning, but she often violated the established schedule, for which she was repeatedly under house arrest. After a while, Mrs. Mullenix noticed that her daughter's feelings were growing into something more. To make matters worse, the two announced that they had decided to get engaged. The move seemed too quick to Barbara. Ian and Rachel had only known each other for 3 months. Barbara didn't want to lose her daughter and the payments she received from her ex-husband. Barbara decided to increase her influence and discipline. Rachel was caught between two fires. She didn't want to offend her mother, whose control was only increasing. Ian, in turn, did not give way. So her mother and Ian began to compete for Rachel's attention. Rachel's fragile psyche suffered with every quarrel and altercation that arose between them. By the end of the summer of 2006, Ian and Barbara's relationship finally deteriorated. The younger Alan was afraid that Rachel's mother would convince her not to date him or forbid her from doing so at all. One day, when Rachel once again violated her schedule for coming home, Barbara exploded. Despite the late hour, Mrs. Mullenix headed to the boyfriend's house and made a scandal. This situation really offended and angered Ian. It became clear to everyone that it couldn't go on like this. On the trail of the fugitives, Bruce was no longer suspected of killing his ex-wife. Detectives turned their attention to Rachel and Ian. Police found out that Barbara had been feeling lonely lately and was drinking a lot. It made her inadequate. Her daughter's attention was slipping away from her. She considered Ian an unworthy companion and Rachel a traitor. That's why Mrs. Mullenix often quarreled with them. Besides, no one knew where the lovers were. They never contacted each other. Given the complicated relationship between Barbara and Ian, the girl's father assumed that Ian was a criminal who was being sought. Rachel, in all likelihood, is not safe either. Otherwise, she would have made herself known, Mr. Mullenix pondered. The police began searching for the missing persons. The Allens' house was also searched. When the detectives checked Ian's computer, they found curious queries on the internet. The guy was researching the route of transportation to the city of Tampa, which is located in Florida. Bruce remembered that before moving in with him, Barbara and Rachel lived there. The couple was reported missing. All police stations in the country received bulletins with a description of the appearance of young people. In addition, the alleged suspect did not disappear without a trace. He left a decent trail behind him. Ian Allen's credit card was used to make a purchase at a gas station in Louisiana. That's also where a surveillance camera captured the guy's truck. Mr. Mullenix's fears were confirmed. Rachel was indeed with him. The only thing left to do was to intercept them. So officers Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright called their colleagues from the next town on the couple's route. Local police shut down highways in search of the van. Ian Allen and Rachel Mullenix were soon caught. The kidnapping story. "Do you know I've been kidnapped?" Rachel shouted when apprehended. "What right did you have to arrest me, to throw me on the ground in handcuffs?" She continued, "I'm not a criminal for you to treat me like this." Detectives Joe and Steve waited for the moment when they could finally question the couple. 2 days later, they arrived at a Louisiana police station. Miss Mullenix insisted that she had not killed her mother. Once investigators pressed the girl, she blamed it on her boyfriend. Rachel claimed that Ian killed her mom and afterwards forced her to run away with him. The police asked for more details about what happened on September 13th, 2006. "I woke up to hear noises in the house. Then I realized that my mother was screaming a lot and calling for help. I rushed to her room. What I saw shocked me. Ian had attacked my mom with a knife. He was stabbing her over and over again. I jumped on him, tried to push him away. He was very strong, so he easily fought me back. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was in a kind of stupor." Rachel began her story. Afterwards, she added that the boyfriend forced her to help cover her tracks. He also insisted that she pack her mother's belongings into bags. Rachel claimed that by doing so, Ian wanted to stage Barbara's unexpected departure. At first, the detectives wanted to believe the girl. The shock she'd been through could send anyone into a state of frustration. But for some reason, the witness to the crime was overly justified. And afterwards, she fiercely insisted that she was not involved in the crime. Furthermore, there were no signs of resistance on Rachel's body. When communicating with Ian Allen, police officers found out an interesting fact. His girlfriend from time to time told about how hard it is for her to live with her mother, how intemperate the woman behaves when she drinks. Instead of reconciling the rivals, Rachel only increased Ian's negative feelings. Certainly some of the facts were true, but some of them were clearly exaggerated. That was why Ian was finally convinced that Barbara would not let them rest. Sometime after the night's quarrel at the Allen house, holding a grudge against Barbara, the lad headed for the Mullenix house. Rachel was under house arrest. I wanted to see her. I knew Barbara wouldn't let me in to see her, so I came secretly. I wanted to sneak into her room quietly, but Barbara spotted me. We got into an argument that escalated into threats. With the folding knife I always carry, I decided to scare her. As soon as the blade was at Mrs. Mullenix's throat, she started screaming. This made me angry and provoked an attack. Things got out of control. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Rachel really had nothing to do with it. Ian said about the incident. To the surprise of the investigators, the guy did not try to avoid responsibility and confess to everything. Over time, detectives became increasingly convinced that Rachel Mullenix was directly involved in the crime. Her boyfriend was clearly covering for her. CCTV footage from the gas station convenience store where the couple had stopped was scrutinized. Rachel was walking around the store looking for groceries. At that point, she could have safely called for help or run away. But for some reason, she didn't. Moreover, as it turned out later, the girl had the opportunity to call her father, but preferred to make a call to her friend. It was found that a couple of hours after the crime, Miss Mullenix sent a message to Ian Allen. "I love you," she wrote in her text. And that's how Rachel finally lost the trust of the investigation. Rachel's defense. It took 2 years to gather and analyze all the evidence in the Barbara Mullenix murder case. During that time, Rachel turned 19 years old. For any other girl, that's a great age. There is a whole life ahead of her. For young Mullenix, her future depended on the jury's verdict, and she tried to convince everyone of her innocence. When Rachel talked about her childhood, her face lit up. It was obvious that the tender years were happily spent. No doubt Barbara and Bruce had tried to make them so, despite many circumstances. Recalling the relationship with her mother, the daughter said that they were good. They were marred only by alcohol, which was abused by the murdered woman and the boyfriend who appeared over time. At school, I was known as a girl from a not very prosperous family with alcoholic parents. When my father drank, he was still himself. He was kind and considerate, which can't be said for my mom. She described the family atmosphere in court. Her words were confirmed by her friend Kelsey Douglas, who often visited the Mullenix family. Kelsey said that Rachel always tried to please her mother in everything, but apparently there came a point when she could no longer tolerate the harsh control and insults. She admitted to me that she had started drinking from time to time. Rachel didn't know what else to do. She had nowhere else to turn. The alcohol helped relieve tension, to forget for a while about family difficulties, Miss Douglas reported. Alex, Rachel's older brother, strangely enough, also stood up for Rachel. He considered her a victim rather than a murderer. That's why he refused to believe in her guilt to the last. He told the court that his sister had been a good and obedient child. She did well at school, practiced sports and ballet. As for the relationship between Barbara, Rachel, and Ian, Alex noted that at first they were great. All three spent a lot of time together. Barbara's eldest son also reported that their mother abused alcohol and illegal substances before her death. She took stimulants and tranquilizers and often threw loud parties. When Barbara realized that Rachel and her boyfriend wanted to distance themselves, she couldn't accept it. In addition, she found it difficult to get by on her own without alimony and maintenance money. All of this became a source of irritation. According to Alex, Mrs. Mullenix was a very controlling woman. She wanted to be in control of everything. With Rachel, she certainly went overboard in this. My mother loved to be the center of attention. With Ian coming into Rachel's life, her position shifted to the side, Alex summarized. In the involvement of his daughter in the murder of Barbara could not believe and the girl's father. He believed that she loved her mother very much and was incapable of hurting her. In all the time, Rachel did not accuse her mother of the weaknesses that were peculiar to her. She simply reported them as a fact. The girl repeatedly stated that she felt sorry for her. Barbara had a difficult life. About the relationship of her parents, Miss Mullenix recalled with bitterness. Rachel said that the slightest details in the behavior of his father drove his mother into a rage. Barbara often snapped at him, considered a spender. Rachel also told the court that she regretted her love for the young man. She made a big mistake when she started dating him. Their feelings brought discord to her relationship with her mother. Ian felt that my mom was a threat to him. He also wanted to control me like she did. My boyfriend wasn't ideal either. Often hurt and treated me like I was his property. I was torn between the two. Every time there was an argument with my mom, I shared about it. It made it easier for me to get over what happened, Rachel recalled. She concluded by adding that Ian did everything he could to prevent harm to what he thought was his prosecution's position. Sonia Belest, the prosecutor involved in the case, did not believe Rachel's story. She claimed that the girl's angelic appearance was deceptive because she thought she was already smart enough for her age. Therefore, the position Miss Mullenix had chosen was thoroughly refuted. The officers who investigated supported the prosecutor in this. Steve Mack and Joe Cartwright believed that Rachel had some mental health issues. According to them, she was the meanest girl they had ever spoken to. During the interview, the prosecutor competently appealed the inconsistencies in Miss Mullenix's testimony. She inquired of Rachel why she never once called for help when she could have done so, to which the girl replied that she was confused and did not know how to behave in such a situation. The defendant also added that she was frightened by Ian's behavior, which was difficult to predict. The prosecutor drew attention to the fact that Rachel had not a single chance to escape. The girl's actions were atypical for a kidnapped victim. The prosecution believed that Miss Mullenix had not only attacked her mother herself, but had planned the crime in advance. When they tried to ask Rachel about the details of Ian's stabbing, Rachel was unable to answer. Her testimony changed and contradicted each other more than once. During the trial, the defendant stated that she was not present during the argument between Barbara and Ian. Allegedly, she simply left them in her room, hoping they would calm down. Only then did she hear screaming and the sounds of a struggle, after which she came running back and saw that the guy attacked her mom with a knife. However, Rachel's version did not coincide with the evidence that was found at the scene of the crime. The forensic report clearly established that Barbara's attacker was not alone. Specialists estimated that 5 minutes had been enough to kill the woman. Rachel continued to insist on her own innocence. Questions: why she didn't call emergency services, why she wrote a love text to the killer boyfriend, were frozen in the air unanswered. The forensic psychiatrist who worked with Miss Mullenix diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder. He believed she truly loved her mother, but she hated her equally as much. By the way, people with this kind of personality are prone to erratic behavior. It's often destructive to both the unsub and others. Bitter verdict. It took the jury 3 days to reach a final verdict. Ian Allen was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. For Rachel Mullenix, the court's verdict was no consolation either. She was found to be involved in the death of her mother and qualified the act as first-degree murder. The girl was sentenced to life in prison. Her first chance for parole will come when the inmate turns about 41 years old. After the verdict was announced, the prosecutor said she was relieved. There is no question that Ian Allen and Rachel Mullenix killed Barbara, Sonia Balest concluded. For a mother, such a death was a true betrayal. The day Barbara brought her daughter into the world, she signed her own death warrant. The child she loved immensely became her light and darkness at the same time. Undoubtedly, Mrs. Mullenix made many mistakes in her life. She was not an ideal mother, but she never abandoned her children to perdition. Barbara's jealousy and fear of being alone hardened the woman's already strong character. But people in love always have a choice. They could simply leave to preserve their right to their feelings. In time, things would have calmed down, relationships would have mended. Perhaps Barbara would have switched to something else, and the grandchildren Rachel and Ian would give her would be her outlet. The tragic story of the Rose family is considered one of the most bizarre and confusing crimes committed in America in recent years. This case struck investigators not only by its cynicism and cruelty, but also by the fact that the victims and the alleged perpetrators were close relatives. Despite the fact that many years have passed since the crime was committed, and the perpetrator has long served his harsh sentence behind bars, there are still many questions and white spots in this story. Many still do not believe in the fairness of the court's verdict. Now let's get down to business. It was an ordinary average family living in a provincial suburb of Bristol in the state of Tennessee and had never been on the radar of law enforcers before. The family was headed by elderly couple Curtis and Lena Maria Rose, who had lived together for over 40 years. They had 2 grown daughters and 6 grandchildren, but we will only look at those family members who were directly involved in this high-profile case. So, at the time of the crime, in the house and the surrounding area were the elderly owners themselves, Curtis and Lena Maria Rose, their eldest daughter, 39-year-old Tosha Milhorn with her husband James, and 6 children. 2 of the children were Tosha and James's shared children, while the other 3 children were their heirs from a previous relationship. Also present in the house was a neighborhood girl who stopped by to play with them. It is worth noting that Tosha and James and their children lived at Tosha's parents' house for about 2 months, as their own home was undergoing renovations at the time. Later, another key player in those events, 19-year-old Seth Denton, arrived at the house. He was Toshi's eldest son, but his relationship with his mother and stepfather was strained, to put it mildly, and they avoided communicating with each other in every possible way, and their last meeting ended in tragedy. According to neighbors, the Rose couple was quite happy and prosperous. Their daughter Tosha was also happily married to James, who worked as an auto mechanic and was fond of restoring vintage cars. It was the Rose couple's family home that was the scene of the carnage. Police officers who arrived on the call later dubbed it the worst crime scene they had ever seen and the bloodiest in the history of their quiet county. The bodies of 2 women, Lena Maria and Tosha, a mother and daughter, were found in the house, shot almost point blank. Tosha was in a chair at the dining room table, and her mother was lying on the floor between the table and the refrigerator. Also lying on the doorstep of the house was the critically wounded James, Tosha's husband, who was quickly rushed to the hospital, but despite the efforts of the doctors, the man soon died of extensive internal injuries and massive blood loss. None of the children in the house were injured. It is likely that they were not targeted by the shooter, or were simply not in his field of vision at the time of the massacre of the adults. Almost immediately after the crime, the police received 2 phone calls, one after the other. The first call came from the owner of the house, Curtis Rose, who said that his eldest grandson Seth had committed a shooting in the house and then fled the scene. But soon there was a call from Seth himself, who told a different version of what happened and blamed everything on his grandfather Curtis. In addition, it turned out that Seth was wounded in the arm and shot him Curtis. However, he did not deny it, saying that he was trying to detain his grandson and not let him escape from the scene of the massacre. The alleged killer, Seth Denton, was arrested in the hospital, where he sought medical help in connection with the wound. Then the investigation was to restore the chain of tragic events and find out what really happened in the house of the Rose family. Surprisingly, but for the basis of the investigation was taken only one version, and the second version was taken seriously only a few years later. She naively believed that this would happen again, and loved ones and colleagues did not even guess that her spouse raised his hand on her. However, a year later, the story repeated itself, and Adrian again beat his wife. This time, Samantha decided that it was the last straw. In addition, her husband's constant temper tantrums and his manic desire to control her every move were driving Samantha crazy. She wrote a statement to the police, reporting that she was beaten by her husband, then took the children and moved to the house of her parents. In the spring of 2017, the spouses officially divorced, and their family home, by court order, got Samantha and the children, and soon they returned there. However, Adrian did not plan to leave his ex-wife alone at all, and continued to pursue her, poisoning her life. The young woman did not feel safe, and was in constant fear. Fearing for her own life and the lives of her children, she obtained a court injunction to prevent her ex-husband from approaching them and trying to interfere in any way in their affairs. But this did not stop Basham. He settled nearby, trying in every way to annoy Samantha. According to a friend of Edrin, he promised to take away from his ex-wife everything that is dear to her, starting from the house and ending with children, as well as openly threatened physical violence against her. Shortly before the tragedy, the man again told his friend that Samantha would soon pay for everything. At the same time, he looked threatening, but the friend did not take these words seriously until he learned of the woman's death. Living in constant fear and nervous tension, Samantha equipped her home with an alarm system, installed bars on her windows, and placed surveillance cameras outside her home. She admitted that she was afraid that her ex-husband might break into her home and harm her or the children in some way. About a year after the divorce, Samantha began to feel that her ex-husband had calmed down and cooled down a bit. He became less frequent in her sight, which gave her the illusion of safety. Samantha even began to have an affair and began to make plans for a new happy life. On July 22, 2018, Fraser celebrated her 38th birthday in the company of close friends and a beloved man named Wayne. According to the memories of those who shared this holiday with her, she looked happy and was quite calm for herself and her loved ones. A few days before, the new chosen one had proposed to the woman, and after the wedding, they planned to take a long vacation and travel to distract themselves and forget about problems. The next morning, Samantha took the children to school and was on her way to work when she received a phone call from someone she knew, warning her that Adrian was in the neighborhood of her home. Samantha was concerned about this, but decided not to panic, just to be more cautious. She was due to face her ex-husband in court in a domestic violence case in a couple weeks, and she feared that he might somehow retaliate against her for the lawsuit. The woman shared her worries with her best friend in a phone conversation, but the latter reassured her. After that conversation, Samantha was never seen alive again. When Samantha did not come to school that day to pick up her children, the teacher, who knew about the difficult situation in their family, decided to call the police. The law enforcers immediately went to their home to check everything, and at first the situation looked as if the mistress had not yet returned. But when the officers of the law decided to check the garage adjacent to the house, before them opened a terrible picture. The body of the 38-year-old homeowner was hanging from the garage door fixture, and on the whole, the picture might have looked like the young woman had taken her own life. But Samantha's appearance was as if she had been run over by a truck. There was literally not a living spot on Samantha, and the hair on her head was wet and falling over her face, covering it. She wasn't wearing the same clothes she had left the house in that morning, and her shoes were missing altogether. It was obvious that someone else had been in the garage, and that someone had tried to make it look like Samantha had voluntarily passed away, but had made a lot of mistakes. For example, there was an overturned stepladder lying next to the body, but the rope was so long that the woman's feet were touching the floor. With age, this feeling turned into hatred, about which Seth often told friends and relatives. After graduating from school, the guy decided to go to serve in the army, and a year later, returning home, he again settled at his grandparents'. However, soon the young man decided that he wanted to start an independent life and moved to the city, where he rented a small apartment with his friend. He got a job at one of the local fast food restaurants, but shortly before the tragedy, the guy was fired. Family and friends spoke positively about Seth, noting that he never had any violent tendencies, did not run with bad companies, and never broke the law. But despite the positive characteristics, detectives considered that the main motive of the crime was Seth's unpleasant feelings towards his mother and her current spouse. According to the investigation, the events of that day developed as follows. Around 5 p.m., Seth drove his car to the house of his grandparents. He was wearing a camouflage jacket, and in the car lay a semi-automatic rifle. He left the car by the roadside, and with the weapon in hand, he went to the house, entering through the back door. Seth then fired several shots, killing his mother, grandmother, and severely wounding his stepfather, before leaving the jacket and rifle by the back door and going to his grandfather's house and asking him to call the police. The order in which the shots were fired was never determined because Seth completely denied his guilt. In addition, it was unclear why he asked his grandfather to call the police rather than fleeing immediately from the scene of the crime. It is assumed that his main target were his mother and stepfather, and the guy killed his grandmother as an unnecessary witness. As the main evidence proving Seth's guilt, the case included his jacket and rifle, found on the threshold at the back door of the house, traces of blood on his shoes, as well as bullets found in his car. Remarkably, about 100 rounds of ammunition in total were found, but no one questioned why he needed so many if he only planned to kill 2 people. Another oddity was the timing. According to the grandfather, after he and his grandson entered the house, where the terrible picture opened before his eyes, Seth hurriedly left the scene. Curtis himself found and took the children to safety, called the police, pulled out the gun he kept, and after all this, managed to catch up with his grandson and shot him twice. It was not until 2016 that the young man presented his version of what happened in court, which no one had previously considered for some reason. According to Seth, he has always been very close to his grandparents who raised him, but meetings with his mother he avoided by all means. As a teenager, he often went to shooting ranges with his grandfather, and it was his grandfather who encouraged him to join the army. On that fateful day, Seth called his maternal aunt Amanda, his mother's younger sister, and said he was going to visit his grandparents but didn't want to meet his mother there. The woman did not know that Tosha and her husband were visiting her parents, so she assured Seth that he could go without fear of crossing paths with his mother and stepfather. Amanda confirmed that information in court, noting that her nephew couldn't have known that Tosha and James were at Rose's house. Seth had hoped that he and his grandfather would go to the shooting range, and that was the reason he had brought a rifle with so many rounds of ammunition. He drove up to the house, got the gun, and went straight to the trailer where Grandpa usually worked. There, his grandson showed him his rifle, and they had a little discussion about it. Curtis then headed for the house without letting go of the rifle, and his grandson followed him. Seth knew that his grandfather had a gun and expected him to follow him, and afterward, according to Seth's lawyers, Curtis may have had a temporary insanity, during which he killed members of his family. But this version seemed untenable, so it was not considered initially and marked in court, although on the clothes and shoes of an elderly man also had traces of blood of the victims. He, for some reason from the very beginning, was not even included in the number of suspects. The young man in the dock was facing the capital punishment of death for the premeditated triple murder of his family members. His grandfather had been a key witness in the case from the beginning, and despite the fact that he had openly stated that he was prepared to kill his grandson that day, the court found such behavior justified. Curtis Rose was not taken to the station or questioned as a suspect, and his version of the events of that day was accepted as the only true one. In addition, many details and inconsistencies were simply overlooked, and Seth's version was not even considered until a year and a half after the crime. Most of the physical evidence did confirm Curtis's words, but what was out of the picture was somehow ignored by the investigation. The main argument in court was that Mr. Rose had no obvious motive for killing his wife, daughter, and son-in-law. The version of temporary insanity seemed far-fetched and untenable. The trial lasted more than a week, during which time nearly 200 pieces of evidence were presented and dozens of witnesses, including neighbors, relatives, and family friends, were heard. The grandfather and grandson's testimony completely contradicted each other, and it was obvious that one of them was lying. The jury deliberated for several days. They admitted to being severely exhausted emotionally and physically, but when it came to a verdict, they unanimously stated that they had no doubt that the defendant was guilty of each of the counts charged. Thus, Seth Denton was found guilty of triple murder, but after a detailed review of all the evidence and circumstances of the tragedy, the court decided to exclude the death penalty from the possible punishments, changing the sentence to life imprisonment. The story of a British woman named Dina Thompson, nicknamed the Black Widow, became, in the mid-20s, one of the main topics for numerous documentaries, TV shows, and crime programs. This pleasant at first glance woman turned out to be a pathological liar, fraudster, and led to the grave at least one man who loved her wholeheartedly. Dina repeatedly managed to escape punishment, but in 2003 she was still in the dock. Despite the fact that she was facing life imprisonment, the court was surprisingly mild, allowing parole. So in 2022, one of the most dangerous criminals, who miraculously survived her ex-husband characterized as pure evil, went free. Thompson's victims were always men, which according to experts, may indicate some kind of trauma received by the criminal in childhood or adolescence. However, Dina's early years were quite prosperous. The girl was born in 1960 in North London and brought up in a full family. Her parents lived modestly, but did everything to ensure that their daughter did not need anything. The head of the family worked as a prison guard, seriously engaged in sports, and from childhood, motivated Dina to attend gyms where she diligently engaged in gymnastics. In addition, the man often participated in all kinds of sports competitions, including those held in other countries, and constantly took his daughter with him. Dina grew up quite active, cheerful, and sociable child. She easily made acquaintances and friendships with peers, and with age learned to quickly win the attention of guys she liked. After school, the girl went to college, and then got a job in one of the local banks. At the age of 22 years, Dina met her future first spouse, Lee Wyatt. They first met thanks to the cousin of the guy, who organized a couple blind date. Between young people immediately burst feelings, and a stormy romance began. They got along well, spent a lot of time together, and 2 years later officially legalized their relationship. After the wedding, the couple moved to a provincial place called Yapton, with a population of only 3,000 people. Soon the couple had a son, and the new parents began to slowly develop their own business, creating authors' soft toys, the images of which they invented together. In parallel, Dina worked as a cashier in a construction organization, and their family, according to neighbors, was quite happy and prosperous. The head of the family was often away on business matters and was absent from home for long periods of time. With neighbors, the man practically did not communicate, but his wife, on the contrary, quickly made acquaintances with local residents. Dina knew how to win the favor of others, easily rubbed in the trust. In addition, men often paid attention to the attractive young woman and even tried to court her. At the dawn of the 90 AS, Dina met with a young journalist, whose name was Julian Webb. The man offered her to work as a model for advertising clothing and household appliances, and soon her pictures were painted on the pages of local newspapers and magazines. Dina was eager to pose and felt at ease in front of the camera. By then, Lee Wyatt hadn't been home for months, and none of the neighbors had any idea where he was or why he'd been gone so long. His wife, apparently, did not miss him too much, having had an affair with Julian. Just 3 months after meeting, the journalist introduced the chosen one to his parents, saying that he was going to marry her. Subsequently, Webb's mother recalled that she was quite surprised by such a hasty decision of her son. In addition, a potential daughter-in-law, who was a few years older than Julian, did not inspire her confidence. When the neighbors learned about the upcoming wedding, they were puzzled because they knew that Dina is already legally married to another man. However, her husband hadn't been home for months, and no one knew for sure where he was or what was wrong with him. As it later turned out, all this time, Lee was in the small town of New Quay, located almost on the other side of the country. There he lived under an assumed name and false documents, hiding, as he thought, from the mafia. In fact, the man became a victim of skillful lies of his wife, who convinced him that their family was in mortal danger, and escape, this is the only way out. The couple, as mentioned, were engaged in creating authors' soft toys, and their most successful creation was Leprechaun Sean, which sold well and gained a certain popularity. In early 1991, Dinah told her husband that their creation was interested in the corporation Disney and is ready to pay £50 million sterling for the opportunity to use this character. But the joy was short-lived, and soon the woman reported that representatives of the criminal world, having learned about the big deal, want to get most of the money, threatening otherwise to kill the whole family. Dina also came up with a way out of the situation, convincing her husband that he needed to hide. Lee quickly acquired fake documents and went on the run. But before this cunning woman persuaded Lee to write several threatening letters to her and make several similar records of phone calls, which allegedly were supposed to be proof that he hates his wife, so that the mafia to stop pursuing her. The trusting husband, not suspecting anything, did as his wife told him to do and then fled. In a foreign city with no home or friends, Lee was ready to take on any job, and all the money he earned was sent to his wife and son so that his family did not need anything. Most likely, this escape really saved his life, but the threat came not from fictional bandits, but from his own wife. In November of the same 1991, Dina married her new favorite Julian, and the wedding couple played on the very money that faithfully sent home deceived Lee. Webb was madly in love and happy, but soon after the wedding neighbors began to notice that the woman regularly visits the lovers while her husband at work. and after a while she informed Julian that she was terminally ill and was fired from her job because of it. The story with a fatal diagnosis and dismissal turned out to be a lie from the first to the last word, and it also turned out that from the accounts of the company where Dina worked, a large amount of money was missing, and the main suspect in this crime was herself. Then the woman accused her first husband, Lee Wyatt, who allegedly forced her to go to the crime by threats. As evidence, she provided the very letters and audio recordings that she herself had previously convinced him to do. Wyatt himself returned home as soon as he learned that his spouse had remarried. The case was limited to a scandal, and although Dina claimed that he had beaten her, there was no evidence of this. Nevertheless, the detectives sided with the woman, so Lee again had to leave Yapton in a hurry. In love, Julian's situation did not embarrass at all, and he gave his wife all his savings for the treatment of fictitious her fatal disease. But time passed, the money melted, and the husband began to wonder how the treatment is progressing. It turned out that the woman did not have a single medical document confirming her diagnosis. Relationships in the family broke down. Neighbors heard how the spouses fought loudly, and in June 1994, the day after celebrating Julian's 31st birthday, he died suddenly. The evening before the tragedy, his mother called him, but Dina reported that her husband wasn't feeling well and couldn't answer. Julian's mother asked her sister-in-law to call an ambulance, but she ignored her request. The expert examination showed that the young man died of a drug overdose, but for some reason no one saw a criminal trace in this tragedy, and his wife insisted that her husband voluntarily decided to kill himself. In addition, she demanded that Julian's body was cremated, but his parents were strongly opposed to this. Also, after the death of her husband, Dina tried to get a large insurance payment, but she was denied because their marriage was recognized as invalid. At the funeral, Dina did not even try to cry or depict grief. On the contrary, she chose a frank outfit and behaved defiantly. Almost immediately afterward, the widowed woman began to spin numerous novels and affairs. She openly brought lovers to her house, not hiding from the neighbors. Only in 1997, Dina filed a divorce from her first legal husband, and less than a year later she met Richard Thompson, who immediately managed to charm. Dina, not thinking long, told the new lover that suffers from a serious illness, and she has to live a very short time. Blinded by love, the man said that he would turn the last months of her life into a fairy tale and is ready to spend all his savings for this. Wedding couple played in one of the best hotels in Florida. There they spent their honeymoon and then returned to their native England, settling on its southern coast in the city of Brighton. According to Richard's memories, his wife literally bewitched him with her care and support, and she also skillfully pretended to share all his views and aspirations. He has always dreamed of owning his own boat to professionally engage in fishing, and his wife not only approved this idea, but also offered him to open a company that provides a yacht for rent so that he could not only fish himself, but also to teach it to others. Less than a year after the wedding, during a New Year's Eve celebration, Dina gave her husband a romantic dinner. They took a bath together, and afterward, she said she had prepared a special gift and asked her husband's permission to tie him up. Richard, not suspecting anything wrong, readily agreed. But as soon as he had the ropes on his hands, a blindfold over his eyes, and a gag in his mouth, he was suddenly struck hard on the head with a bat, followed by another. Luckily, Richard not only did not lose consciousness, but managed to free himself quickly. Then Dina grabbed a knife and wounded her husband in the shoulder. Richard knocked the weapon out of his wife's hands, immobilized her, and called the police. Dina burst into tears, admitted that all this time she had lied to him and spent all his money. However, already at the station, she pulled herself together and began to claim that it was her husband who attacked her, and she was only defending herself. The story did not end there, and a day later, a real estate agent came to Richard's house to sell the house. He had an appointment with the landlady, who warned him that her husband had left for America on a business trip. At that moment, Richard realized that his wife was planning to kill him, sell the house, and run away with the money. No one would look for Thompson himself for a long time, thinking that he had gone across the ocean. In the course of court proceedings, it turned out that the woman had withdrawn all the money from her husband's bank accounts, forging his signature, and also used his credit cards, accumulating a lot of debts. The case gained a wide resonance, and other men began to apply to the police, former lovers of Dina, whom she deceived and cleaned to the thread, telling about a fictitious, incurable disease. Then also remembered, and the first husband of the woman who had to hide for many years, first from her fictitious pursuers from the mafia, and then from the police. It was finally revealed that it was Dina who stole the company in which she worked, accusing her husband of everything. However, the jury, despite the presence of irrefutable evidence, acquitted the woman in the case of the attack on her husband, Richard Thompson, and Richard himself was accused of seeking to attract attention to himself, making up such a story. Nevertheless, Dina was found guilty of numerous financial frauds and sentenced to nearly 4 years in prison. The hype around Dina Thompson also reminded about the strange, sudden death of her second husband, journalist Julian Webb. The woman herself told completely different versions and circumstances of his death. She said that her husband was poisoned by steroids, which he took to keep himself in shape, then claimed that he drank a lot and fell asleep in the sun, getting sunstroke, and at the inquest, and in general, said that he took his own life. Despite her caution, Dina once confessed to her best friend that she had poisoned her husband by putting potent drugs in a spicy dish that he adored. The police managed to track down the owner of the diner where Julian often dined and ordered food to take home. He recalled that the day before the tragedy, Webb's wife took out rice and chicken curry. And then the investigators guessed that it was this seasoning that interrupted the specific flavor of the drugs. In connection with the newly discovered circumstances, a new investigation was initiated, and Julian's body was exhumed and sent for examination. As it turned out, the man was poisoned by a large dose of powerful antidepressants added to his favorite dish with curry, and strengthened their effect, aspirin, which Dina dissolved in her husband's drink. At the time of the call to his mother, Webb was still alive, and he could be saved, but it was not part of the plans of his wife. In 2003, the Black Widow was finally brought to trial. The investigator at the hearing characterized her as the most dangerous woman he had ever had to deal with, and the judge noted that she was a skilled and very dodgy liar. Dina Thompson was sentenced to life in prison, but with parole eligibility after 16 years. The story of the crimes of the Black Widow formed the basis of numerous documentary detectives actively discussed in TV shows and mused in the press. Even after Dina was behind bars, detectives unearthed another dark story from her past. As it turned out, one of her first lovers disappeared without a trace, and to this day has not been found alive or dead. The young man's name was Stoyan Kostov, and he lived in Bulgaria, where Dina herself trained as a gymnast in the late 70s. Between them began a romantic relationship, and afterwards, the guy disappeared forever. The investigation does not exclude that Dina is directly related to this case, and Kostov became one of her first victims, but it was not possible to prove anything. While serving her sentence, Thompson worked with a prison psychologist and underwent rehabilitation courses. Despite her exemplary behavior and the right words about re-education and realization of her mistakes, Dina, according to the detective in charge of her case, does not feel remorse and pangs of conscience, and therefore can re-offend. Nevertheless, in the summer of 2022, the 61-year-old Black Widow was released from prison. After learning about it, Richard Thompson said that now he will not feel safe because he does not know what to expect from his former spouse. Now, Dina is obliged to report to the police about all her connections and relationships, observe curfew, and report on all financial transactions. She is also forbidden to approach her ex-husbands and lovers affected by her actions. She is forced to wear a special tracking bracelet on her leg that records all her movements. A few months after her release, Thompson was captured by journalists while returning from a store with shopping in a large bag. The case of Shannon, Christian and Christopher Newsom. The tragic end of 2 college students. Have you ever heard the saying that hesitation is akin to death? In our story today, this takes on a literal meaning as the negligent delay by police officers cost the lives of 2 young people. During the subsequent legal proceedings, it was repeatedly stated that the officers followed protocol and waited 24 hours from the time of the missing persons report. However, it was during these critical hours that the couple endured a tragic end under extreme cruelty. The case of Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom is cited as one of the most notorious and brutal in the history of the United States. It shook the nation twice, first in 2007 when the crimes occurred, and later in 2011 when the sentences handed down to the gang members were challenged and appealed. This complicated legal battle led to the enactment of 2 laws. These laws restrict attorneys and defendants from casting the victims in a negative light and abolish the requirement for a jury's unanimous verdict to be approved by a judge. In this harrowing tale, there were 2 innocent victims and 5 merciless criminals, with the motive for the heinous act being a simple robbery. Let's delve into the details of this tragedy, piece together the chronology of those horrific events, understand the role of each participant, and explore whether this tragedy could have been avoided and the young lives saved. Who were Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom? Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., commonly known as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom, in a loving, large family. As the youngest child, he was adored by his family. Chris was athletic in his youth, particularly excelling in baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a severe injury and the prolonged recovery process ended his promising athletic career. Nevertheless, Chris was a man of many talents. He was an excellent artist, played guitar, had woodworking skills, and was knowledgeable about cars and motorcycles. Dreaming of becoming a mechanic in his youth, Chris's passion for carpentry eventually took precedence. After high school, he attended the prestigious University of Tennessee, where he was a diligent student and ranked among the top of his class. Shamandale Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas, the younger of 2 children to Dina and Gary Christian. She was raised alongside her older brother Chase, with whom she shared a close and affectionate bond. Notably, Dina had been diagnosed with infertility in her youth, and the birth of her 2 children was considered nothing short of miraculous. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools, and the parents established a small but profitable family business. Dina conducted individual psychotherapy sessions at home. Shannon, sharing her mother's interest in psychology, was outgoing and kind-hearted. After high school, she pursued a degree in sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save for her dream of buying a car. Her parents and brother helped her realize this dream on her 21st birthday, contributing towards the purchase of a silver Toyota 4Runner. It was on the university campus in 2006 that Christopher and Shannon met through mutual friends. She was just 21, and he was about to turn 23. It was love at first sight, and the couple became inseparable. Within a month, Chris introduced Shannon to his parents, expressing his desire to spend his future with her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Chris to her family, who warmly welcomed him. In October 2006, a significant family dinner was held, attended by both their parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around the young couple's deep feelings and their plans to marry after graduating from university. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall their families. Vanished on the way to a party. On January 6, 2007, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were invited to a birthday party of a mutual friend. That Saturday, Shannon visited a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Chris was delayed, leading to a slight argument between them as they were running late for the event. Their friends became increasingly worried when Shannon and Chris did not show up at the party. Known for their responsibility, it was unlike them to miss an event without notifying anyone. Attempts to reach them on their phones were unsuccessful. In desperation, Shannon's best friend repeatedly called her mother late into the night to check if everything was all right, but received no answer. The next morning, Dina, Shannon's mother, realized that her daughter had not come home. Initially, she was not overly concerned, assuming Shannon might have stayed over at Chris's place after the party. Besides, Shannon had a work shift on Sunday, so it was plausible she went straight to work from Chris's place. However, Dina's concern grew when she noticed several missed calls from an unknown number around midnight. Returning the call, she heard Shannon's friend's voice, informing her that Shannon and Chris had not shown up at the birthday party and were unreachable. This instilled fear in Dina, sensing that something terrible might have happened to her daughter and her boyfriend. Neither Shannon nor Chris was answering their phones, and Chris's parents were equally surprised, believing he was staying at Shannon's place. Further anxiety arose when it was discovered Shannon had not shown up for work either. The worried parents immediately contacted the police, but the response was lackluster. The officers suggested the couple might have simply sought some alone time and lost track of it. They also followed the protocol that an adult is considered missing only after 24 hours without contact. But for Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours were critical. Not willing to wait, the parents and friends of the young couple began their own search. They contacted everyone they knew, visited hospitals, distributed flyers with their photos, and set up social media groups appealing for any information about the missing students. Despite their efforts, no useful information surfaced. The last known sighting of Shannon was at the beauty salon she visited on Saturday. According to the hairstylist who attended her, Shannon only talked about the upcoming party and had no plans to stop anywhere else on the way. A gruesome discovery along the railroad tracks. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that the police finally began their search for the missing young couple, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. By this time, thanks to the efforts of their parents and friends, almost the entire city was aware of their disappearance. The day before, on Sunday, there were rumors about a horrifying discovery near the railroad tracks, but no concrete information was available. A railroad worker, inspecting the tracks in his assigned area, stumbled upon what appeared to be severely damaged human remains on the embankment alongside the tracks. The body was in a horrific state, with multiple injuries, and had been doused with a flammable liquid in an attempt to burn it. The police, responding to the scene, cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough examination. However, they were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death and to attempt identification, though it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this difficult. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal death. The victim had multiple injuries inflicted while he was alive, indicating prolonged and severe assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back and a final, fatal shot to the head. Additionally, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body, along with distinctive tears, suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police checked recent reports of missing young men, Christopher Newsom fit the description in age, height, and build. The officers contacted his parents and requested DNA samples for confirmation, but strongly advised against personal identification at the morgue, as the burnt remains barely resembled human features. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed that the body belonged to the missing student, Newsom. The search for Shannon. Despite the distressing news about Christopher, Shannon Christian's parents still clung to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held somewhere. Her mobile phone was last pinged on the day the couple disappeared in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, a place they wouldn't have visited by choice. This indicated that they were likely brought there against their will, and Shannon might still be held in the area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned. It was in a terrible state, so much so that Dina and Gary Christian hardly recognized their daughter's car. The SUV was dirty, scratched, with broken headlights and deflated tires. All of Shannon's personal belongings were missing from the car, which was littered with cigarette butts, and the seats were torn and stained. The driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that a large adult male had been the last one to drive it. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, a vehicle that stood out in that area. Fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lamarcus Davidson, previously convicted for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, lacked witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offer to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Shannon alive inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, as well as Christopher's headphones and baseball cap. A knife with blood traces, torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing, and Shannon's lifeless body were discovered in the house's trash chute system, hidden under dirty sheets. She was bound in the fetal position and wrapped in 5 trash bags. Experts later concluded that she likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. This tragic finding suggested that if the police had begun their search immediately after the missing persons report, rather than waiting for 24 hours, Shannon might have been saved. A horrific state of suffering. The condition of Shannon Christian's body was a horrifying sight even for seasoned forensic experts, as there was not a single untouched area on her. Shannon was covered from head to toe with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous tears and injuries to her genital area, as well as her oral cavity and throat, indicated that she had been subjected to multiple assaults by several men. Shannon sustained a serious head injury and internal bleeding in the abdominal area, likely resulting from being kicked. Furthermore, the merciless assailants inflicted several penetrating, though not fatal, stab wounds on her and extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin. In a brutal attempt to destroy DNA evidence on her body, the perpetrators doused her with household bleach, paying particular attention to bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was also forcibly made to ingest bleach. After these torturous acts, Shannon, still alive, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and then shoved into a household trash chute covered with sheets and rags. She slowly suffocated and bled to death, helplessly trapped with no chance of escape or calling for help. 5 merciless perpetrators. Lamarcus Davidson, in whose house the mutilated body of Shannon Christian and personal belongings of the deceased Christopher Newsom were found, was immediately declared a fugitive. The police also tracked down another suspect, Eric Boyd, whose traces were found at the crime scene. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th without resistance and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he wouldn't go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. Davidson, unprepared for this turn of events, was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing sneakers that had belonged to the deceased student. During interrogations, Davidson tried to minimize his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house looking to buy banned substances, but were caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred in his absence. Further interrogations revealed 3 more individuals involved in the case: Davidson's friend George Thomas, his half-brother Latalvis Cobbins, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. Once all 5 suspects were in custody, they were placed in separate cells and interrogated individually. Each tried to deflect blame onto the others, inadvertently revealing details of the heinous crime. Their fragmented accounts helped piece together the event's chronology and each perpetrator's role in the brutal act. A timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, who had been released from prison on parole just a few months before these events, was desperately in need of money. He was involved in the sale of banned substances and urgently required a vehicle to deliver these to his customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot, known for its lack of surveillance cameras, and headed there with his accomplices. Tragically, at that moment, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot, arguing over Chris's delay. The criminals, deciding to leave no witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. The pair was taken to Davidson's house, where they were brutally beaten and repeatedly assaulted. After midnight, a barefoot and undressed Christopher was again forced into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. His torment was ended with a final shot to the head. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in hopes of destroying any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. Having dealt with Newsom, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. She endured horrific cruelty the next day, leaving her without a single uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her, still alive, into plastic trash bags, where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment when young Vanessa Coleman joined the group was unclear. During interrogations, she claimed to be a hostage herself, participating in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd indicated that Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly participated in the events, even taking some of Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Further, a personal diary found at Vanessa's home contained her descriptions of the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she referred to as an exciting adventure. The initial trials and sentences. During the investigation, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the criminal group and the primary instigator of the brutal acts against the innocent victims. Davidson tried to deflect blame and downplay his role in the atrocities, attempting to shift responsibility onto the deceased themselves. Davidson claimed that the couple came to his house to buy banned substances and later suggested engaging in rough intimacy with him and his friends, a situation he said spiraled out of control. Remarkably, the defendant's lawyers latched onto this version, attempting to tarnish the reputations of the deceased in court. The parents of the victims later expressed immense emotional anguish over these claims. Nevertheless, Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and particularly cruel and premeditated termination of life, among others. The jury unanimously decided that Davidson deserved the death penalty for his heinous acts. Letalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, faced the death penalty for his role in the torture, assaults, and involvement in the termination of life. However, he was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same crimes, with no chance of release. Eric Boyd, considering his cooperation with the investigation and assistance in capturing Davidson, was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. The relatives of both victims found this sentence outrageously lenient. As for Vanessa Coleman, born in 1988, the only female participant in the atrocities, the investigation proved her involvement in the torture, assaults, and in Shannon's tragic end. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Overturned verdicts and new hearings in 2011 while the criminals were serving their sentences and Davidson awaited execution, the case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, admitting to a substance dependency. His ability to conduct trials was questioned, and his verdicts over the last 2 years were annulled, leading to new hearings, including the case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. After the retrials, Davidson's sentence remained unchanged. Death penalty. Cobbins continued to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas, however, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from the original 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected, and parole was denied in 2017. In 2020, the parole board decided she would remain incarcerated at least until April 2032. Eric Boyd's situation changed most dramatically. Originally receiving a relatively short sentence for cooperating with the investigation, his involvement in the assaults and tragic end of both victims was later proven. His retrial resulted in a life sentence without parole, with his accomplice Thomas testifying against him, revealing previously unknown details about Boyd's role. For his testimony, Thomas, who initially had the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15%, contingent on good behavior. Boyd's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful. He is currently serving his sentence in the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson remains in the maximum security Riverbend institution, awaiting the execution of his death sentence. Public reaction and the case's impact. As previously mentioned, this trial garnered significant attention, widely covered in the press, and leading to the enactment of two laws. The first was aimed at protecting victims from defamation, attempts to shift blame onto them, and portraying them negatively. This was in response to the defense strategy of the accused and their lawyers, who tried to label the students as drug users and thrill seekers in a troubled neighborhood. These claims were completely false and caused immense pain and suffering to the victims' families. The second law eliminated the need for a judge's signature on a jury's unanimous verdict, which, if in place during this case, could have prevented the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, which became a torture chamber for the young couple, was demolished in the fall of 2008. A memorial was erected on the site in honor of shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom. In memory of Christian, a golf tournament and a Christian charity foundation were established, providing support to victims of violence. Similarly, a foundation in Newsom's name was created, holding annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and awarding a scholarship named after the deceased student and former baseball player. It's important to note that, despite the public outcry and widespread attention, the media initially misrepresented details of the case, either accidentally or intentionally. Many believed that the variations in reporting and delayed coverage were influenced by racial motives, as the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors noted, "I can't confidently say that this case would have received more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of committing similar atrocities against 2 black individuals." Additionally, the Knoxville police chief stated that there was no evidence to suggest these crimes were committed based on racial animosity. The case of Jennifer Sabina. Why did a loving husband mutilate his wife? Many of us have heard repeatedly of the severe psychological condition known as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, but few have thought about what lies behind those 3 words. The term is used to describe mental disorders that result from a single or repeated encounter with a severe traumatic event: violence, accidents, disasters, war, etc. This type of disorder is often found in military personnel, people who have been involved in combat and witnessed the deaths of others over a long period of time. Even after returning home, they have a hard time adjusting to civilian life. According to a report by the World Health Organization, 1/3 of soldiers returning from conflict zones experience some degree of PTSD. Most tragically, their loved ones suffer as well, desperately trying to help them overcome the crisis and get their lives back on track. The family of Benjamin Sabina, an Iraq War veteran, struggled with this problem for years. Unfortunately, the disease proved to be insurmountable. Jennifer Sabin's case shocked the quiet town of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, with its brutality. Moreover, it was the first case of a police officer killed in the line of duty in the town's history. Behind it, all was a tragic story that spanned nearly a decade and culminated in the death of a young woman. Let's start at the beginning to make sense of the situation and try to determine if there was a chance to avoid such a dramatic denouement. Jennifer and Benjamin Sabina. Before they met, Jennifer Louise Sabina, née Miller, was born in 1982 in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. She was the oldest of 2 children in her family and grew up with her younger brother Jacob, with whom she always kept in close touch. When Jennifer went to school, her parents decided to separate and filed for divorce, after which her father moved to another state and stopped playing any role in his children's lives. Her mother had to work hard to provide for the children, but Jennifer was always her main helper and support. She kept the house in order, cooked meals, and took care of her younger brother while their mother worked tirelessly. In addition, Jennifer excelled in school and dreamed of a future career in law enforcement. Benjamin J. Sabina, also a Milwaukee native, was Jennifer's age and even attended the same school as her. However, despite this coincidence, they did not know each other personally. After high school, Benjamin joined the U.S. Marine Corps and served 2 tours of duty in Iraq. He was honorably discharged in 2005 after suffering a severe concussion and numerous injuries to his body and limbs. The story of how the couple met. While serving in Iraq, Benjamin registered on the newly emerging and rapidly growing social networking site, Facebook. There he searched for his hometown, and while browsing the profiles of fellow citizens, came across the profile of a charming, smiling girl named Jennifer. After researching her information, he realized that they had once attended the same high school, but he couldn't remember her. After thinking for a bit, Sabina decided to approach the pretty girl. He greeted her, told her that he was currently serving in Iraq in the Marine Corps, and asked how she was doing. Jennifer didn't respond right away and briefly wrote that she was doing well. It was obvious that she was not eager to correspond with a stranger, but the young man was not confused. Benjamin began to write to her daily, even if she did not respond. Gradually, he managed to capture the attention of the beauty, and they began to chat casually on various topics, remembering the school where they once studied together, and trying to understand how they had not met before. A mutual liking developed between them, and they even started planning a reunion when Benjamin could come home. By then, Jennifer had graduated from the police academy, received specialized training, and after successfully passing all of her exams, became a police officer in her hometown of Wauwatosa, Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. It was her dream job since her high school years, and she was incredibly proud of it. Jennifer emotionally shared her joy with a pen pal who sincerely congratulated her on this accomplishment, severe injury, and return home. Benjamin was supposed to return home in November 2005, but in February of that year, he and several of his comrades were hit by mortar fire. Almost all of Benjamin's comrades were killed that day, and he miraculously survived but was severely wounded. His kneecap was nearly shattered, his left arm was nearly torn off by shrapnel and held together by only a few tendons and a piece of skin, and he suffered shrapnel wounds to his chest, head, and a severe concussion. The Marine was taken to a military hospital where he was painstakingly picked up piece by piece, and when his condition stabilized, transferred to Germany for treatment and rehabilitation. His arm was saved, although it had partially lost sensation and function, but his knee was in much worse condition. Doctors were inclined to believe that Benjamin was unlikely to be able to get back on his feet again. During this time, Jennifer, with whom he corresponded daily, was very supportive and encouraging. She said that she was constantly praying for his recovery, believing in a miracle and hoping for the best. The miracle did happen, and gradually, Sabina began to recover, relearning to walk. A few months later, the demobilized Marine was sent to California, where his military unit was based. After completing the necessary paperwork, he returned to his hometown of Wauwatosa as a combat veteran and disabled veteran, where his parents and Jennifer, with whom he had become very close through correspondence, were waiting for him. By then, Benjamin was continuing his rehabilitation program, which was yielding good results. The muscles of his damaged limbs recovered and became stronger. He started to exercise, and soon was able to use his left arm normally, and contrary to the doctor's predictions, began to walk and even run. As soon as they met Jennifer for the first time, they realized that they didn't want to part for a day. The couple spent all their time together, talked about everything in the world, and it seemed that they had known each other all their lives. Between the young people began and rapidly developed a passionate romance. Jennifer considered her lover a hero, surrounded him with care, and supported him in everything. Benjamin was very grateful to her for this, and at the end of 2005, he offered to make her his lawful wife, to which she happily agreed. They did not delay in registering their marriage and got married on New Year's Eve 2006. Severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The time spent by the young man in war zones did not pass without a trace, leaving him not only scars, but also a deep psychological trauma. Benjamin suffered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with all the typical symptoms, including nightmares, increased anxiety, psychotic experiences, known as flashbacks, depression, and thoughts of self-harm. For the former Marine, any loud noise, popping, fireworks, or even the sound of a passing airplane could trigger memories of his horrific experiences. He regularly underwent therapy, worked with specialists, and there were times when the disorder receded so much that his loved ones thought that he returned to normal life, but this impression was deceptive. According to Benjamin's own recollections, during the war years, he witnessed the deaths of at least 50 of his comrades, many of whom were close to him, and their loss was felt as a personal grief. Jennifer and Ben attended church together, where the man also sought help in overcoming the psychological problems he faced. A combination of different therapeutic approaches, medical and spiritual, proved effective. Recovery seemed close at hand, but some symptoms appeared to have become chronic. Because Jennifer and Benjamin were still young and full of hope and plans, they decided to postpone having children until his condition stabilized. The couple believed that they had their whole lives ahead of them and that they still had time for everything. However, 7 years after the wedding, Benjamin's condition had not improved. He was still plagued by nightmares, panic attacks, and thoughts of self-harm. Moreover, due to his injuries and disorders, the former Marine was not only forced to give up his military career, but was also unable to get another prestigious and promising job. Warning signs. In 2012, 7 years into rehab, all the progress Benjamin had made over the years began to rapidly deteriorate. In October, Jennifer confided to her best friend Linda that her husband had acquired a gun that he hardly ever parted with and even slept with it under his pillow. At night, he would often wake up with nightmares, screaming, grabbing the gun, unable to realize where he was, and feeling as if he were still at war surrounded by enemies. At times like these, his wife would try to do her best to calm him down and bring him back to reality. These nightmare episodes became regular, and the sedatives prescribed by the doctor hardly helped. Moreover, Benjamin began to have thoughts of voluntarily ending his life, which he shared with his wife. In an attempt to reassure him, she told him that she could not live without him and would follow him in his care. By then, both spouses were in their 30s. Jennifer had a promising job, was respected at work, had many friends, and was adored by those around her. Benjamin had only a government-appointed disability pension. He socialized only with close relatives and parishioners, as the couple attended church services regularly. He had almost no friends, as people avoided and feared him because of his strange behavior and occasional bouts of aggression. Probably in addition to PTSD and depression, Benjamin was experiencing an impending midlife crisis. It seemed to him that everyone around him was moving forward, striving for something and achieving something, except for himself. Even his wife's care and support began to seem like a mockery to him, and he was tormented by feelings of guilt and shame for his own inferiority. In early December 2012, Jennifer was transferred to night shifts. She now patrolled the streets of Wauwatosa from dusk to dawn, maintaining order. She was very worried about this because her husband would be alone at night, and if he had another nightmare or memory, there would be no one to help him. As their 7th wedding anniversary approached, Jennifer was thinking of taking a vacation, planning a trip to the ocean for a change of scenery and relaxation. On December 17th, she shared these plans with a colleague, but these plans were not destined to come true because a week later there was a terrible tragedy that cut short the life of a young woman, a tragic incident in a quiet town. On the evening of December 23, 2012, just before Christmas, Jennifer came in for the night shift. Throughout her shift, she texted her husband constantly, worried about his condition. Toward dawn, the messages from Jennifer stopped, although her husband continued to text her asking if everything was okay. Early in the morning, at 5 o'clock, the dispatcher tried several times to contact Jennifer, but when the patrolman did not respond, he decided to track down the location of the squad car Jennifer was using. The car was found at the city's fire station, located just 5 minutes from the police department. Patrol officers often stopped by here to grab a bite to eat or write a report at the end of their shift. However, the officer was still unresponsive, which caused serious concern because it had never happened before. Dispatch sent another officer from the station to the fire station, where a horrible discovery awaited him. Jennifer's squad car was parked at the back door of the building, and just a few feet away, right by the exit, Jennifer lay lifeless on the snow-covered pavement in a pool of blood. She had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the head at close range, and her face was virtually unrecognizable. The officer immediately reported the incident to the station, from where an investigation team was dispatched to the scene, as well as a medical team. Thus, on the night before Christmas, Officer Jennifer Sabina became the first police officer in the history of the quiet town to be fatally wounded in the line of duty. Suspicious widower. Around 6:30 a.m., Benjamin called the police station, inquiring how his wife was doing and why her phone was not answering. He was told that there had been an incident with Jennifer, without giving details, and was asked to come to the station immediately. He arrived less than half an hour later, looking anxious, but strangely, asking no questions. Benjamin didn't try to find out what had happened to his wife, whether she was hurt, or if she was even alive. He answered a few standard questions, telling what had happened the night before and where he had been while his wife was on duty. According to Benjamin, after his wife left, he went to the store briefly and spent the rest of the evening and night at home playing video games and texting Jennifer until she suddenly stopped responding. In the morning, he called the station and was asked to come in. At the time, he could not be charged, only questioned, standard procedure. However, the police noted fresh abrasions on his hands and dried blood on them. In response, Benjamin said he struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder and that pain often helps him come to his senses. When the former Marine was finally informed that his wife had been fatally wounded, he had a real breakdown. He jumped up, shouting that it couldn't be true, knocked over a table, and began pounding his fists on the wall. It took several strong officers to subdue and calm the distraught widower. Case investigation. At the crime scene, in the freshly fallen snow, there was only one set of footprints leading from the tire tracks to the back door of the fire station and back. This suggested that the perpetrator was alone, and based on the size of the footprints, it was an adult male. Ballistics analysis yielded even more intriguing results. 5 bullets were fired at the officer from 2 different weapons, the first from a 9mm handgun and the second from Jennifer's service weapon, which the perpetrator had taken with him. All of the bullets were aimed at the head, 2 in the back of the head and 3 in the face, indicating personal animosity, deep hostility, or a desire for revenge. However, the young woman had no enemies. Everyone who knew her personally loved and respected her, speaking of her only favorably. On the same day, footage from all the street surveillance cameras leading to the fire station was requested. As it turned out, there were virtually no cars on the roads of the small town in the wee hours of the morning. However, around 4 a.m., a black Toyota Prius with tinted windows and black rims pulled up to the fire station. At some point, the car disappeared from camera view, and a short time later, the same car was seen traveling in the opposite direction, heading directly towards Sabin's home. It is noteworthy that Benjamin arrived at the police station that morning in the same car for questioning, which removes all doubt. He was immediately followed, arrested as the prime suspect, and his house was thoroughly searched. The first thing investigators noticed was the holes in the living room wall. The drywall had been punctured, apparently by fists, and bloodstains were visible around the edges. It became clear that this was where Benjamin had gotten the abrasions on his hands, and it had happened no later than the night before. On the refrigerator door were colorful sticky notes that the couple used to leave messages for each other. If Jennifer's notes radiated love and care, her husband's were either dry and one-worded or so insincere that they seemed like quotes from romance novels. A shell casing from a 9mm pistol was discovered in one of the dresser drawers, and the weapon itself was soon found in the bedroom, in the bedside table on the side where her husband slept. The search for Jennifer's stolen service weapon took the police a lot of time and effort, but eventually the gun was found in a ventilation duct under the ceiling. Forensics confirmed that it was indeed the weapon used to shoot Jennifer. Benjamin's version. At first, after his arrest, Benjamin stuck to his original statement, claiming that he had not left the house and denying his involvement in his wife's death, insisting that he loved her and could not have hurt her. However, when he was presented with irrefutable evidence of his guilt, he began to sob and testify. He revealed that he had suffered from various manifestations of post-traumatic stress disorder for years after returning from the war zone. Neither the love and care of his wife nor his church nor experienced doctors could help him. Recently, he had been thinking more and more about voluntarily ending his life, and he shared this thought with his wife. However, she persistently discouraged him, claiming that she could not live without him and would follow him. It is alleged that Ben decided to dispose of his lover out of mercy. He reasoned that they were both religious people, and if Jennifer took her own life, it would be a grave sin leading the soul to eternal damnation. so he decided to spare his beloved from eternal suffering and take all the burden by ending her life and then ending his own. Benjamin knew that his wife, like her co-workers, stopped by the firehouse at the end of her shift to write a report. He watched her for days to make sure, to find out the exact time and place where she parked her car. That fateful evening, he arrived on time, about 15 minutes before his wife got out. He waited for her right at the door, acting quickly and decisively, firing 2 shots to the head with a pistol he had brought from home. Then, he claims, she turned around, drew her service weapon, which he had taken from her, and fired 3 more shots to the head. However, it was the expert's opinion that the first 2 shots to the head were fatal and that she was unable to turn around or reach for the gun. Moreover, the entry wounds indicated that the last 3 shots were fired into her body while she was lying on the ground. In addition, it was unclear why Ben shot her 5 times in the head, substantially disfiguring her face, necessitating a closed casket funeral. Trial and sentencing. In the end, Benjamin fully pleaded guilty, but attributed his actions to a severe mental disorder, stating that he was not aware of his actions. As a result, a psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which showed that although the man suffered from severe complex post-traumatic stress disorder, he was fully aware of what he was doing. Moreover, Sabina had planned the crime in advance, subsequently tried to cover his tracks and hide evidence, and continued to send messages to his now deceased wife's cell phone to avert suspicion. Witnesses, including friends and co-workers of the deceased, testified that the husband was jealous of his wife's career success and often took it out on her. In addition, Benjamin was insanely jealous of Jennifer's male co-workers. He believed that his wife could leave him at any time because she is surrounded by young, healthy men who do not have the physical and psychological problems that he had. His jealousy and suspicion, compounded by his anxiety, drove her to despair. Sabina appeared in court in a wheelchair, bound hand and foot because of his constant attempts to harm himself. He fully pleaded guilty, cried, apologized to his mother-in-law, and stated that if he could turn back time, he would never hurt the woman who loved him and whom he loved. In June 2013, Benjamin was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder despite serious mental health issues. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Jennifer's mother stated in court that she forgave her son-in-law and left his fate in the hands of God. The defendant's mother testified that her son returned from military service a completely different person, deeply distressed both physically and mentally, broken and lost. She and her daughter-in-law tried desperately to help him, but the darkness in his soul was overwhelming. In addition, the case of Officer Jennifer Sabin's death subsequently sparked a heated debate over whether her name should be included on a Washington memorial honoring law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. Initially, the decision was made to exclude her name because of the nature of her death. However, after significant protests and collective petitions from Wisconsin residents, her name was eventually added to the memorial wall.